1720. A captain wagered ink and hid his fortune in a book. In the spring of 1720, the Caribbean smelled of tar, citrus, and pursuit. Nassau's brief republic of rogues had been tidied by Woodes Rogers, and the noose had learned the names of men who once drank to liberty. Those who would not take the king's pardon slid south among the Bahama shoals, flying false colors over hulls patched with prayer. Our ship, no grand galleon, but a lean brigantine with square fore and fore and aft mizzen, carried 32 souls and a captain who kept a better log than conscience. He called it the Book, bound in tarred calf and spattered with salt like a priest's surplice after storm. He wrote in a tidy hand the weather, the rations, and the names of vessels met and mastered, and sometimes a line that sounded like regret gnawed into rope. We had quit New Providence after a night when lanterns swung like verdicts on the quay. A sloop of war prowled the roads. Pardoned men pointed with clean fingers. The book records our course in numbers, but remembers it in smells. The mangrove's sour breath, the sugar hole that gave us a cough, the gunpowder that slept until anger shook it awake. The crew were a parliament of scars. Anne from Tortuga could splice a cable or a man's pride. Oh, Morchew the Irishman sang psalms to drown the catechism of the sea. Little Matteo knew every channel close enough to shave an anchor. The captain never named himself in the book. He wrote in the mirror, calling the master he, the crew they, his own heart it. When rumor reached us that a treasure Guadacosta out of Havana rode fat with silver from Veracruz and church plate from Campeche, the book's hand steadied. In the margin, a single word, Providence. On the facing page, a drawing of a saint's hand broken from its statue, the ring still on. Below it, a line measured not in miles, but in tides. There is wealth, and there is proof. We require the latter to purchase the former. Thus the chase began. The last a log would faithfully keep. We sighted her off the Yucatan current, sails slack in a noon nailed to the ski, a Spanish Guadacosta, low and mean, towing fortune under a sanctimonious flag. The book notes, reef-top gallants, colors Dutch, guns silent until prayer ends. We crept to leeward, the brigantine hushing her own bow wave. At pistol shot, the saint on their stern glittered. At musket shot, the saint learned humility. Our first broadside was small but honest. 9-pounders that spoke like sober men. Thereafter, most gun answered late. Grapnels flew, the hulls kissed like quarrelers reconciled only for the fight. Boarding is arithmetic you count with blood. Matteo went under and came up laughing with a knife in his teeth. Anne fired, primed, and fired again. O Morchew sang the Miserere in a key that kept powder dry. When it ended, the sea resumed breathing. The Guadacosta's captain lay with a rosary tangled in his fingers. His mate, wounded and practical, offered a key and a list of ports for water and a surgeon's needle. The book drew a line through his name but kept the key. In the hold, we found bales that had never sinned and chests that knew how. One wore priestly clothes, carved with lilies, bound with brass, sealed with red wax pressed by a ring like an eye. In the wax was grit, as if the seal had been made on a church floor in haste. Inside, plate proper. Beneath, a thin ledger bound in blue paper. The hand was crabbed and clerical, the ink brown as old fruit. It held columns of numbers and a map that refused to be one. Curves of current and counts of day marks, soft with handling. The captain weighed it like a sentence. "Treasure makes fools," Anne said. "Proof makes ghosts," he answered, and slid the ledger into the book's sleeve, as if two scriptures might agree. We burned the Spanish colors respectfully, took water casks and set the wounded ashore on an honest beach. The sea swallowed our wake without opinion. Behind, the lilies smoldered like small suns that had lost their minds. The blue ledger worked like a tide table for greed. Its figures were virtues in disguise, soundings, bearings, the hours when a reef puts on a friendly face. It named no island, only a cay like a sleeping seal, and 3 palms in a row, with a 4th ashamed of the others. The book drew them as small crosses with roots like fingers. We argued beneath an awning. The master-at-arms wanted silver divided, then scattered to ports like seed. Anne wanted a single bold throw. The captain read the ledger the way a parson reads a difficult psalm, finding promises under threats. He wrote, not a map, but a confession. 3 days later, a square-rigged shadow began to haunt our horizon, too neat for a merchant, too patient for a fool. She kept her weather gauge and her name to herself. By dusk, her topmasts were points cut out of the sky. At midnight, the book records, lanterns doused, men and guns and socks. We slid behind a squall as if into a cloak. Lightning taught us briefly how we looked to God. At dawn, the shadow still hunted, and her bunting spoke Kingston. The ledger's riddles proposed a refuge near the Caicos, where the banks wrinkle into private water. Mateo conned us through patches the exact color of forgiveness. The lead sang its little truths. Flying fish committed harmless suicides on our deck. At noon, the quay rose, a low thought in a high sea, sand white as a priest's lie, the promised palms and a 4th leaning seaward as if longing to desert its fellows. The men went quiet, as if the place had ears. The captain set the book on the capstan and wrote in a hand that would not shake, "We bury to unbury." The proof first, then the plate. One buys the other when the rope tightens. We hauled the chest ashore under tarpaulins. The sand gave way without complaint. The ledger's last page, turned sideways, showed 4 lines that only the sky could read. That was where we would make the ground remember us. We dug with shovels and with the flat of our hands until nails wore crescents of sand. Anne ruled the work as if the earth were a sullen crew. Omer Chu stood sentry with a long gun and a longer hymn. The pit collapsed twice with the politeness peculiar to dry sand. We boarded the sides with planks torn from a spare water cask, so the whole looked like a ship laid wrong way up. The chest went down first, a prayer for gravity, then canvas sacks of plate that made the work honest. Over them the captain laid the blue ledger, wrapped in oilskin and stitched with copper wire, and over that the book itself in a tarred sleeve. He paused, touching the cover like a brow, then set it down as a man sets down a burden he intends to lift again. Markers matter. The ledger's map of not a map called for a triangle of signs. The leaning palm's shadow at noon, a stone like a skull at the tide line, and a compass bearing to a star that would drift a little but forgive. Anne scribed the inside of a conch, with numbers no church could forbid. Matteo stacked 3 coral heads where only a careful eye would honor the pattern. The captain returned to the brigantine and wrote a second set of marks. Not coordinates, but a psalm's acrostic copied crooked, the initial letters turning under the ink like fish. Night brought a smaller storm, words about shares and risk, the old grammar of steel. The master-at-arms reached for a solution the way a hand reaches for a belaying pin in the dark. By fortune or Anne's warning glance, it found air. "Bury your courage with your coin if you must," she told him, "but not your captain." The book, even sleeping under sand, ruled us by the habit of its order. At dawn, we tamped the last layer, scattered shells, and laced the surface with tracks to suggest nothing. From the offing, the quay looked unbitten. The 4th palm leaned to sea, as if holding its breath for centuries to come. We cleared the quay by noon and stood off under easy sail, meaning to fetch fresh water at an island that wore a blue hat of cloud. The shadow returned before sunset, a 6th rate out of Port Royal by her rig, long-legged and temperate, eating miles without boasting. The book slept under sand. In its absence, the captain kept a poor cousin, a few stitched leaves he called the jotter, small enough to hide in a coat, large enough to carry a man's last weather. He wrote, "Windy by S, a kindness. Sloop bears WSW, a schoolmaster." He also wrote, "If taken, burn this," which is advice that never travels as fast as fate. We crowded on canvas and threw 2 guns by the run to sweeten our heels. The brigantine leapt like a fish told there are nets behind and ahead. Night came without stars, and with it, rain like split rope. Lightning gave us a chart in white scratches. Shoal to port, black water to starboard, the hunter astern as faithful as forgiveness. Anne conned by smell when the binnacle refused to glow. Matteo counted seconds between sky and sea and turned both into bearings. The sloop fired a ranging shot that walked spray across our taffrail. "One more squall and we are a sermon," Omerchu said without looking up. The jotter's last clear line reads, "Take the mangrove creek. Trust silence. Heave short." We slid into darkness thicker than law. The sloop overshot, then found our absence and returned it like an insult. Men breathed through cloth to keep quiet their lungs. Even the hull held its tongue. For 2 hours, patience favored thieves, and then the tide changed its mind. Our keel kissed mud. The creek remembered it was land pretending. Oars whispered, grapnels answered. A voice in English offered terms no man writes home about. The jotter's last words scratch into nothing after, "If we must strike, let." The rest is ink like rain. We hid the leaves in a tarred jar within the forepeak and waited for boots. They came, punctual as noon. They took us into Port Royal's mouth like crumbs into a patient throat. The sloop's captain preferred ink to blood. We stood in a room whose shutters believed themselves to be bars. The clerk wrote as if he were being watched by a clock. The questions were old friends in clean coats, names, flags, the origin of the silver, the destination of our souls. The captain slipped into the third person as he had in the book. He kept order. They pursued prizes. It was the sea that persuaded them. A grammar useful when gallows learn your name. Someone whispered, Calico Jack had been taken near Negril the month before, his women fiercer than his men, his last night full of cups that had their own reasons. Whether true or served as gall to season us, it meant the wind of pardon had died. The magistrate allowed a hymn because hymns do not alter facts. Anne stared him into a smaller man. They searched the brigantine like a confession they hoped to edit. They found nothing but lawful dirt, for the book in the ledger slept under sand, and the jotter lay in its tar jar behind a plank Matteo had nailed as if closing an eye. We learned the taste of the jail and of bread that remembers water. Omochu traded recitations for kindnesses. Matteo played fool to learn the patterns of keys. The captain wrote a confession for the pamphleteers, a tidy account heavy with weather and innocent of positions. Between lines he hid an acrostic again, the first letters naming 3 signs only the sky could read. The clerk copied it fairly, none the wiser, and the confession went walking among coffee houses like a tame beast that might bite. A date was set that made the night shorter. We did not expect mercy. We asked only that the sea be visible from the place. Anne's request was stranger. She asked for paper and was denied. She smiled as if that too were a kind of proof. The gallows learned our shoes. The island, bored by death, went on selling sugar. Years leached names from stones and salt from wounds. The brigantine's timbers were broken into honest planks, then ashes. Port Royal chewed and rebuilt. The sea chewed and did not. In a hurricane late in the 19th century, a mangrove bank split and coughed up a tarred jar to a boy who thought treasure would glitter louder. Inside were stitched leaves, ink the color of over-steeped tea. A schoolmaster called them lies in good sentences. A collector paid enough to make them truths on paper. The jotter slept again until a dealer in Kingston, bored, sold it to a captain who liked storms. In the 20th century, a woman in a small library found the pamphlet confession and noticed that certain first letters knew one another. She wrote them out and watched them become marks. A leaning palm, a skull stone, a bearing to a star that forgives a little. She matched them to the jotter's last clear line. Take the mangrove creek, and to a sheet of currents folded into the pages. Maps are shy animals. When two agree, you follow. She hired a fisherman who did not believe in stories and therefore could keep one. The K was there, sulking among shoals. The fourth palm leaned still. They dug where sand holds its breath. The spade rang a plank. Beneath lay canvas, then wood, then a chest that smelled of old smoke. Inside, plate that reflected a sky pretending innocence. Under it, the blue ledger in oilskin. Below that, a tarred sleeve about a larger book. When she opened it, the sea seemed to read over her shoulder. On the first page, a neat hand. The book returns by Providence. On the last, a line in another ink. We require proof to purchase treasure. The island watched. She closed the covers and listened. Surf counted, palms fretted, a gull filed an appeal. In a museum case, the book looks ordinary. Salt bloom, careful script. Visitors lean in, and in the glass, you see an ocean waiting. Some nights, the hinges sweat. That is not humidity. It is history remembering how to breathe.